Alright, so I created a video before, but I realized that I recorded it while I was in three screens, and it made the video extremely weird looking and hard to follow. So I turned off three screen mode so that I can just capture the center screen and get a nice big picture of what I'm actually going to be doing here. So a quick overview of my system. I have 300, 144 hertz G-Sync Asus ROG monitors. Um, my computer is a i7 Extreme 12-core processor, a single GTX 1080, and dual solid-state drives. The solid-state drives don't really do anything for iRacing, but that's my system specs. A quick note though about the processor. It doesn't make that much of a difference over what most people generally have. If you have a i5 quad-core CPU like a 4690K or 6000 series i7 or an i5, you're going to get about the same performance that I'm getting. The processor isn't going to make that much of a difference. Um, the the biggest difference in iRacing is always going to be found in the video card. Um, when we build computer systems and we help customers kind of decide what they should be ordering, we always recommend a 1070 or a 1080. We always recommend the latest in video cards because that's going to make the biggest difference. CPU is always secondary to that. It also does depend on what games they're playing. If they're playing Battlefield or BF1, an i7 should be beneficial to them because those games take advantage of hyper-threading, whereas iRacing actually does not. Or it does, but it doesn't. So anyway, that's the rundown on my system and my opinion on that. The video card is completely stock. It's actually a pre-release 1080 directly from NVIDIA. It's not an Asus, it's not a EVGA, it's actually direct from NVIDIA, so it's like as generic as 1080s get. I don't overclock, not against overclocking, I just don't care to deal with it on my personal system. So the CPU and the video card are, again, completely stock. Stock settings, stock everything. I don't even think I have an XMP profile in the BIOS. Well, I do, I just don't set it up. So anyway, since I'm recording with Fraps, it automatically reduces the frame rate down to 120. It won't go any further past that. When I go into options, this is my personal setup, nothing special. I run an ECCI 7000, use a set of G920 headset, sim pedals that we don't sell anymore. But these are my graphic settings. This is what I run. My monitors are 2560 by 1440. I have three of them, so what I would be choosing would be 7680 by 1440. The at number is, I believe that's supposed to be a refresh rate. iRacing's kind of changed things, and admittedly, I haven't raced in a very long time. I haven't really been keeping up with iRacing at all. The company's been extremely busy lately and just don't really have time for it much anymore. But that might change. I don't know. I just blew the motor up in my drag car, so maybe it's time to get back into sim racing. So I'm going to start up here in the display area. So again, you want to select the resolution of your monitor. If you have 3 screens, you want to take your first number. So if you're 1920 by 1080, your 1920, you're going to multiply that by 3, and you'll get 5760. So you'll be 5760 by 1080. The 5760 is your 3 screens horizontally. So that's your number. The 1920, the 1080 number always stays the same because that's the height. So when you're running 3 screens, the height always stays the same. It's the horizontal number that will always change. If you run single screen, you want to select 1 GPU. If you have more than one, you obviously want to select how many you have. Number of screens. If you're single screen, again, click 1. If you're running multi-screen, then click 3. And then once you click 3, these 2 options here will light up. You just want to select the multi-projection. Don't do the SMP. I think SMP is for, I can't remember actually what SMP is for, but I don't use it. This is also very important for lining up your bezels. So you have to break out the tape measure and physically measure your monitors. Don't try to guess at these numbers. I mean, you can if you want, but if you want an exact bezel correction, you need to whip out the tape measure and measure your screens. And the only thing that can kind of be estimated is the viewing distance. I do not sit 19.1 inches away from the monitors. I actually sit probably a good bit further than that, but the game looks good to me at 19.1 inches in the configuration. So that's why I do that. But these, the monitor width including bezel and the visible width excluding the bezel, those should be exact numbers. And your angle can kind of be guessed as well. I run a pretty sharp angle. I don't try to stick the monitors out far away to increase the field of view. I actually like the side monitors being fairly closed in on me. It definitely helps a lot, especially with oval racing, which is mostly what I do. Down here under your different graphic options, so everything on the far left here should be set to high detail with the exception of particles. Particles set to high actually does make a pretty deep performance hit. Setting them low though kind of makes them look like crap, so I just suggest medium. You want full res and soft to be checked on, and I have headlights checked on. Max cars, so I do want to talk about that a little bit. You just want to choose the average amount of cars that are going to be in the server with you. Whenever you jump into a race, if it's less than 30, great. If it's more than 30, you might want to consider bumping it up just a little bit. 30, I usually run that all the time, no matter what. If I jump into a race that has 40 cars, 30 is still fine, because I don't plan on being at the back of the pack and seeing everybody, unless it's a super speedway race. But even still, 30 cars should be about good. It doesn't have too much of an effect on performance. It can, depending on if you have a lower end system with a lower end video card. So play around with that number a little bit. But the next issue here, I see this a lot in the forums. Oh, I block my frame rate, and that's what I run. Stop locking your frame rate. You're not doing yourself any favors. If you're locking your frame rate, you may as well just scroll down here and click on VSync, and then forget about all these other options that you're setting, because they're not going to make a damn difference. Some of them will, but you're basically inducing VSync by limiting your frames per second. It does nothing for you. Now, some of you are going to argue, well, if I'm running a 60 hertz monitor, my monitor can only output 60 frames. That is true. That is 100% true. Well, then your argument will be, well, then I should lock my frames to 60 because that's all I'm going to be able to see. Logic would tell you, yes, that is true. But by locking your frames, you're forcing the simulator to basically not be able to move up and down in its frame buffer as it needs to. You're basically locking the frame buffer. And yes, if you're on a 60 hertz screen and you're getting 220 frames per second, you're not really getting 220 frames per second physically, but the video card is able to do that. That's what the graphics card is performing at. And by limiting the frames per second, you're also limiting the video card. You're disrupting the frame buffer. Now, you can set the frame buffer in the NVIDIA control panel and the AMD control panel, but I don't recommend doing that. That actually can hurt performance. You basically want the frames per second to go where they want to go. It's not going to help you in any way by limiting it or restricting it. You're basically creating a bottleneck by doing that. So I recommend no limit. All the way down here at the bottom, these sliders. The GPU video memory should always be far right. The max system memory, I run it far right, but for some reason it helps me increase my frames by doing that. For some people it hurts them, so what I suggest doing is play around with it. It should never go below half of what you have. So if you have 8 gigs of memory, it should never go below 4,000 megabytes or 4 gigs. It should always be either in the middle or on the far right. Anisotropic filtering and AA samples. So AA samples is anti-aliasing. So if you have an NVIDIA card and you're in the NVIDIA control panel, you want to match these two settings. So anisotropic filtering, 16x, anti-aliasing, 4x. Those of you with higher end systems and higher end video cards, you can kind of play around with the 4x versus 8x. With me, it really actually doesn't make too much of a difference. I can run 8x and not really get too much of a performance hit. 4x is just fine. I can't really tell the difference between the two. You might see a slight bit more jaggedness with 4x, but it's a lot better than 2x and it being completely turned off. In my opinion, 4x is the perfect compromise between performance and quality, and that's what I recommend. I've helped customers over the phone, setting up their graphics, and they have these settings all messed up. They have the NVIDIA control panel not set up correctly, and then they have this set up completely foobarred. They're running 2x anisotropic and 8x AA samples, and it's just a cluster. And I go in here and I set it the way it's supposed to be for them, and boom, instantly 40, 50 frames per second gain. Their gain looks 10 times better than it did before, and everything's super smooth. I've done the same at the Texas iRace for Life seminars. I've gone around plenty of times to help people out, and people come up to me all the time, ask me if I can look over their system config and kind of change their graphic settings around. And in some cases, I've gained people 75, 100 frames per second at times, but on average, it's about 40 or 50. And most of the time, it's these two settings right here that do that. And the issue here is iRacing just allows people to have too much control. They go in to the game and they just start selecting random options, and what they don't understand is that one option can have a direct effect on another, and it can get confusing for some people, and you end up with really poor performance. And unfortunately, iRacing doesn't really take that into consideration, in my opinion, and they don't explain very well that, one option can affect another, and people just get lost in this, and then they get used to the shitty performance that they're getting, and they just live with it, and they don't understand what they could have. One thing to note is I've been doing iRacing since it first released to the public, and these settings that I'm showing you right here have been my settings since pretty much the beginning. A few things have been added here and there by iRacing, the shadow maps and shadow volumes, and so those things do change, but in general, these have been my settings since the very beginning. I don't change them. It's my go-to, and it's actually pretty close to my go-to in all games that I've played. I don't really stray too far from this. And I learned this just trial and error, just reading up what certain things do, trying to figure out, what's the best mixture of options to get not only the best performance, but the best quality with performance. So anyway, moving on. Render dynamic track data, render dynamic tire data. Want to have all that on. Shadow maps on everything. That's what you want to have. And then all the subchecks on underneath that. Shadow volumes completely off all the time. More shadows. That'll go off once you turn that off. Night shadow maps. Turn it on. Walls. Turn it on. Headlights. That's kind of up to you. You can turn it on, turn it off. Really depends on your video card. If you have a higher end video card, then you shouldn't have an issue with that. Number of lights, that's going to be the number of, I could be wrong. I think it's the number of lights around the track that illuminate during night, and the number of lights that can cast a shadow at any given time. So probably somewhere between 3 and 5 is a good number. I'm going to go with 4. I think it was up a little bit higher by default earlier, but I haven't raced in a really long time. I would probably suggest 4 and kind of go from there. Adjust the number, and you'll probably get better performance. Shader quality, always high detail. And then all of these settings off to the right here are kind of personal preference, with the exception of a few. Hide steering wheel, I don't run with the steering wheel. It's just a distraction. I always run with the virtual mirror. I never run with the cockpit mirrors on. And I always turn off higher detail mirrors, mostly because it is a pretty big performance hit, and I'm not looking in the mirror for detail. Headlights on track and mirrors, kind of personal preference. Far terrain, most high-end systems should be able to run far terrain. Actually, most systems in general should be able to run far terrain. Two pass trees, that's probably something that a lower-end system should probably have turned off. And the trilinear filtering. Trilinear filtering is going to improve the texture quality. You know what I just noticed? When you hover over these things, iRacing kind of tells you what does what. Well, that's good. It's good that they do that, actually. That's cool. Heat haze effects. Brand new to me. Never tried it. It's there it is right there. Huh. That's neat. It kind of looks like the track swimming. Anyway, video memory swap high-res cars, that should be turned on, and 2048, 48 car textures. Again, high-end video cards only, in my opinion. And then that's high car numbers, personal preference. Replay. So your settings here are not going to have any effect on what's happening while you're driving. So feel free to turn all of these up, high detail, everything turned on. I still prefer shadow volumes off in this, but everything else, man, you can pretty much go to the moon. If you're trying to record something really nice for YouTube or something, then turn everything up, get it to a decent frame rate. Something just above your monitor refresh rate should be fine. And go to town, have fun with it. It's not going to affect anything while you're driving. So that's that. That's it. I'm going to take a few screenshots here and show my performance. And hopefully I'll have this forum post up soon.